Unlike if we learn to sing or we learn to play an instrument or we learn to play football, when we learn to draw, we get something at the end of every session. We get a drawing. And, well, that's one of the good things about drawing. But it's also one of the problems we face when we learn to draw, because it's very natural that our focus becomes on getting the drawing. And this can create a big problem when we're learning to draw, because our focus can so easily be on the drawing that we get at the end rather than on the process of learning. That we sit down thinking and all excited about having a great drawing at the end rather than on this journey of learning a skill and seeking to do that journey as well as we can. And rather than thinking of the drawing I'm going to have in 15, 20, 30 minutes time, I'm thinking of the drawings I'm going to be producing in 1, 2, 3 years time. And what I do today is tailored towards that longer term goal. This is important because where we focus our attention, what our aim is in the moment, affects what we do. It affects the decisions we make, and then the things we do and how we do them. Let me explain some of the unhelpful things that a focus on having a good drawing at the end of my drawing session creates, that actually will undercut, will slow down, may even totally derail my bigger picture desire to learn to draw well. And the first is that when I'm focused on having a nice drawing at the end, I'm going to be more concerned with not making mistakes because, well, they're obvious even to the beginner and they will quite clearly ruin my drawing. Therefore, I can't afford to make any mistakes. So I'm going to develop an approach, a way of thinking that actually focuses on not making mistakes more than it focuses on learning to draw well. Because let's face it, learning any skill requires taking risks. We have to go for the ball in a way that we risk missing it in order to start to learn what it feels like to connect with it powerfully and accurately as well. We need to risk what we say in learning a foreign language. We need to risk saying the wrong thing to develop the skills of fluency and of the proper rhythm and speed for a particular language. It's no different with drawing. I can't create the marks that I need to learn how to create. I can't place them on the paper with the rhythm and the tempo and the confidence that I need to learn to place them on the paper with if I'm preoccupied with not making a mistake. When I'm preoccupied with the finished drawing, it's going to be easy to focus on ink on paper techniques. In fact, thinking that the drawing, because the ink on the paper is what I see, that learning to draw is really all about learning what the techniques are. What are the ways of putting ink on the paper? The right ways. And so I'm also going to be perhaps caught up with thinking that there's a certain way to draw certain things, and I need to learn what those things are. Just as in a foreign language, there are certain ways to say things. So with drawing, there are certain marks we use to draw certain things. So I'm going to be trying to find out what's the right way to draw faces, to draw eyes, to draw hair, to draw leaves, to draw water. I'm going to be thinking, how do you draw clouds? Thinking that there's a technique, a way of doing each of these things. And this means I'm going to, in my head, divide my thinking into there are things I can draw and things I can't draw. There are things I know how to draw because this is the way you draw them, and I don't yet really know how to draw, say, hair, because I haven't learnt the technique. We're going to get this very unhelpful black and white understanding of what the drawing process is, and that what I have to do is to find the trick, the technique. And from that place, it's easy for me to slip into the very unhelpful way of thinking that, in fact, learning to draw is all about finding all of the secret tricks, hacks, shortcuts, the ways that let me draw all these things easily. Because when I'm thinking that the way to draw these things is to know the marks and how to put them together, then I only have to find that out. and I delude myself into thinking that these things exist, and therefore I waste a lot of time trying to find them, and that once I have them, the actual drawing will be easy. In fact, I may even think that the really good artists have this conspiracy of keeping their secrets secret. Another problem with fixating on what my finished drawing is going to look like is that I can easily fall into the danger of looking at other artists' drawings and fixating on those drawings, and bit by bit fall into the habit of mostly drawing other people's drawings. And I might even notice how much better my drawings are when I do that. But sadly, the reason is that it's much, much easier to copy someone else's drawing, because copying is an easier skill than creating our own drawing. It's a much easier skill because it doesn't actually require the most basic and fundamental drawing skill of all. And I think the other problem with focusing on the finished drawing is it makes me impatient. It sets me up to be wanting these drawings, to have these drawings to admire, to show my friends, and maybe to do something else. Maybe I'm looking forward to signing them and feeling like a real artist. Maybe I'm imagining an exhibition. Maybe I'm starting to buy frames already when I find them on sale. Maybe I lie in bed wondering how I'll spend all the money I'm going to make on my print-on-demand business from my drawings. But as a beginner, when we think drawing is about producing drawings at the end, it's easy to run ahead and in the end thinking more about what we're going to do with our drawings rather than the thing we should be focused on. So if I'm learning to draw and I'm not meant to be thinking about the drawings I'm going to get at the end, what am I meant to be thinking about? I think it's going to be far more helpful, productive, and getting us to the place where we really want to get to if we're thinking about learning, if we're thinking about how we learn to draw more than the actual drawing. Because at the start of the learning to draw process, it's as much about how we learn anything. It's about, in effect, learning to learn as much as it is about the drawing we have at the end of the learning session. And for many of us, if we learn to draw as an adult, it can be a very long time in the past since we actually learned something new. And so we might have to think back to what our most productive school lessons were. The teachers where we learnt the most from might be helpful to ponder for a moment. What was it about their teaching that let me learn so well? Because if I'm learning to draw and I'm not doing a course, I don't have a class teacher, then I need to be my teacher as well. So I need to be over the whole learning experience as best I can. And part of that is to understand that when I'm starting to learn something, it's not about having the finished product. When I start to learn to play football, I'm not going to be focused on playing a whole game particularly. I'm going to be focused on developing the skills that will allow me to play the whole game well. When I think about learning a language, I'm not usually trying to engage in one-on-one conversation with a native speaker immediately. And it's the same when I'm and it's the same when I learn drawing. It's not helpful to attempt the sorts of drawings that I hope to do, that I've seen other people do, that may have inspired me to want to draw myself. It's not helpful at the start to focus on trying to draw those, but rather to focus on whatever I need to develop to be able to draw those drawings. That will enable me to get to that place. And what I produce in the meantime is ink on paper or pencil on paper or whatever we're drawing with as an exercise, as practice sessions. And some of them may turn out quite well, but my goal is not to have them turn out quite well. My goal is to learn from them. And so that will often mean I am taking risks, that I'm not worried about how my finished drawing is going to look at the end of 20 or 30 minutes. In fact, I'll deliberately push it to destruction to learn what it looks like when I go beyond perhaps the place that I naturally would want to stop in case I wreck it. But I remind myself I'm not making artworks, I'm learning, and I push my drawing to the point where I know I've gone too far because now I've learned how far I can go before that happens. When we connect learning to draw more with the learning than the to draw, it reminds us that a learning experience is one that, while can be enjoyable and exciting, and most of the time we don't have to do, that it will also require hard work and effort and understanding and some wisdom in the choices that we make, that there are better ways to learn than others, that I will need to make decisions about my learning. I will need to set up or choose not to set up processes for learning, and that these will affect in some way either where I get to or at least the time it takes me to get there. And of course, I can just draw for the simple pleasure of drawing, where I have no interest in what's on the paper at the end, but I find the process just stimulating or creative or relaxing or healing or whatever, and that's fantastic. But if we're learning to draw because at some point we want to be able to create drawings that have some sort of impact, that make some sort of statement, that cause some sort of reaction in ourselves or in others, if we have a goal that goes beyond the process and is connected with how we've done looks, then our process of learning is, in the end, I think, going to be more important than learning techniques to do a particular thing, a particular ink on the paper skill. Because I can learn those skills and still not understand when to use them, how to combine them together. And this is the problem when I copy other artworks. I don't have to work out what marks to put where in relation to either the reference photo, that what was in front of the person drawing, or what was in their imagination. I don't have to understand that translation process at all because I don't see it. I don't even realize that it's gone on possibly, and I'm just copying their marks. But the real creativity is when the artist works out what marks to put where on the paper to create the effect that they're wanting. Whether it's an abstract or a hyper-realistic effect, whatever effect the artist wants, there is still a translation process to get from the reference, the object in front, the imagination, onto the paper. And that is the real skill that we need to develop. And that only develops through trial and error. And sometimes we can get outside input that fast tracks that trial and error. We see things we can try, we see if they work, or perhaps they'll work better for me if I adapt it in some way with what I'm already doing. But I still have to do the trial and error and be prepared for the error so that I also learn what works. In my experience, as I've focused on the learning process, as I've become better at learning to learn drawing, my drawing has improved dramatically. And in fact, all these videos on the drawing process come from my learning to learn how to draw. And they've certainly transformed my drawings, and I hope they've helped you with yours. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope these thoughts have been helpful if you're starting off, to perhaps set you on a surer course to get to where you want to go. Sometimes what appears to be the most direct route actually takes us somewhere else, and we don't yet know enough to realize that. So hopefully this will help you avoid what could be a very time-consuming wrong path. But in the end, whatever you do, however you do it, whatever you get at the end of your drawing session or don't get, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.